Secure your tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the rocky tops of the La Platas on a rocky mountain high, get sucked into the vortex of the Four Corners, and settle down snugly at mile marker 420 in colorful Colorado. It is Sunday, August 29th, Monday, August 30th for those of you across the pond and beyond. Welcome to We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. I'm so glad you could join us this evening. I'm your host, TessaTNT, and I hope you guys have had an awesome and relaxing weekend so far. And if you're listening live right now, you're listening to us on Spreaker.com. You can also find us live on KPNL Radio, which you can find at kpnl-db.com. If you would like to follow or listen to us in our past shows, you can look us up on Twitter, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, CastBox, Tumblr, YouTube, SoundCloud, TuneIn Radio, Deezer, Podcast Addict, as well as Podcast Chaser. So I have a treat for all of my guys and gals out there. Tonight, we will be talking to Reverend Peter Panagore, and he was recruited to TV as the fifth minister of America's oldest religious broadcast. Peter's 2-minute spot aired for 15 years just before the morning weather on News Center, Maine, on 2 NBC stations, reaching 80,000 viewers a day. Previously, Peter served in New England as a United Church of Christ minister. His Audible bestseller, Heaven is Beautiful, has been optioned for a film. His first book, 2 Minutes for God, is a non-denominational devotional drawn from his 1700 TV stories. He is working on his third book, built around his talk, and provides mentoring to spiritual seekers worldwide. So Peter, and this is a lot of what we're going to be talking about, but there's a lot of other things that I do believe that we'll touch on this evening, but he went ice climbing with his partner on the world-famous Lower Weeping Wall along the ice-filled parkway in Alberta, Canada. On their descent, they became trapped on the side of the mountain. As the sun set, he was overcome by exhaustion and hypothermia. He died on the side of that mountain, and in 2 minutes on the other side, he experienced hell, forgiveness, and unconditional love. And heaven is beautiful. Welcome, Peter, and thanks so much for being on the show this evening.
Tessa, it's really good to be here, and I guess you're out there in the Four Corners. I'm way over here on the eastern seaboard.
We have quite the distance, but man, Maine sounds beautiful.
Yeah, the sound is great. So, that was quite the intro. Thank you for that. I tend not to call myself Reverend. I never really have. Even when I was working out of the church, I always went by Peter. Only because when I was dead, I found that there was absolutely no difference between any human beings at all. We're all made out of the same thing, love. And so I kind of shy away from that Reverend thing.
Yes, well, Michelle was nice enough to send this to me, and I put a lot of trust in her. So I'm sorry if that made you uncomfortable, but I understand what you're saying.
No, it's totally cool. I mean, I live in a town where some people call me pastor, or they call me father, they call me padre. They call me other names too, but mostly in jest.
Pops.
But titles seem well, they're not real to me.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
I totally feel you there.
I wasn't uncomfortable. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I said I feel you there. Like, as far as titles go, it's just a title. It really, has no meaning. And like you said, we're all basically made from the same thing. Not one of us is better than the other. But I do really appreciate your service and what you do out there. So before you had this experience, were you a religious person or doing this work, or did this follow after your experience?
I was raised Roman Catholic and Greek Orthodox. Simultaneously, these two churches hated each other for 1,000 years, And so I grew up in this, in betwixt and between the conflict that raged in over there in the Mediterranean between the East and the West. And I did go to church. I went to catechism, went to Greek school, but I was naturally born mystical. I began having mystical experiences when I was a child. After my first one, I learned not to talk about them, and but I had no intention on going into the ministry. That's like the last thing on my mind. But after I died, my whole life changed. I came back a completely different person. I'm still not religious. I never really was religious, and I'm definitely not religious now. Spiritual for sure. But I didn't know what to do with what had happened to me, and I didn't understand it. So I decided to not go to graduate school in architecture. It has been my plan of my family and me to go into the family firm that I've been working on my whole life. Decided not to do that and went to divinity school to study mysticism and ended up getting talked into being a minister and tried to get out of it several times. I was a good minister. I was good at what I did. And I'm not bragging. I'm just saying that I was good at it. Working inside the church was pretty uncomfortable for me most of the time. Why? Because all of my faith and beliefs were taken away from me when I died. I went to this place of non-being and union where God had no thingness. It was at best described when I was first starting to talk about it. I would talk about it as nothingness. Mm-hmm. But people found that disturbing. How can God be nothing? Well, because it's so other, it's indescribable. But God had no religion, and there was only love. And so when I came back, I had no belief system left. My belief systems in everything, all of my belief systems in everything that I used to believe in, not just the Bible, everything, culture, gender identity, you name it, politics, everything. It was all gone. None of that was real to me anymore. Anything that human beings had constructed in their heads that wasn't naturally found in nature, it didn't have any meaning for me at all. And so I went into ministry because of the divine love, not because of any belief. I came back knowing that God is real. And my difficulty was and remains living in this illusion that everybody thinks is real. And I give it a little r, a small lowercase r for that real, and I give the divine side of things, the heaven side, a capital R, because that's the only reality that's lasting, eternal, ever-present, and true for me. So I came back an alien, pretty much, in this world.
Very
and
nice.
I hid out in the church.
Right?
Yeah.
That's a good hiding spot.
Yeah, I did. I was hiding. Well, I figured once I realized that, so I went to divinity school. I didn't go to divinity school to study theology. I went to divinity school to study mysticism. And I learned that around the globe and in Christianity, which was my major area of study, but within Christianity and around the globe, there's a long history of mystics who have entered into the oneness of being, into the union state of the divine, and come back and written about it. And we have their books, and they gave instruction on how to carve a deeper channel inside yourself to access heaven here now. And so I figured I had this degree. The dean of admissions talked me into getting ordained, and I figured I could hide in the church in plain view. I could spend my life practicing my meditation, my prayer life, my Kriya Yoga, and my studies, because I continued my studies in the context of the church, and nobody was the wiser to what I was actually doing, which was diving much deeper inside myself. Nobody troubled me about it. If I had been meditating and doing yoga in the architectural office, that would have been a problem.
Right.
I needed to find I needed to find my way back to the divine. That's what I needed to do. Yeah, and so I figured if I hid out in the church, no one would suspect, and nobody did.
Very good plan. Worked out very well. So, kind of rewinding, you had mentioned that as a kid you did have these experiences, and I feel like I kind of come from the same place as you as far as I had these experiences. To me, they were normal, but when I shared them with other people, they really made me feel weird and abnormal, like there was something wrong with me, and I'd lose friends over it. Could you tell us a little bit about your experiences as a kid?
Sure. When I was, and definitely what you just said, Tessa, I didn't have trouble with my friends because I learned before I had friends not to talk about it. Because I was 5 years old when the first thing happened. I was waiting for my sisters to come home from Catholic school. They went to Catholic school, and I was in kindergarten, and I had gone to morning class, and I had a baby brother who had just been born, and my mother told me, stay out of the house till your sisters get home because the baby has to sleep. So I was allowed to climb my little maple tree, and I climbed up my little maple tree, a couple of branches up. It's a small tree. And I was sitting in the tree, and as I sat in the tree waiting for my sisters, the the spring leaves were flipping back and forth between these two tones of green in the breeze, and I became mesmerized. And as I became mesmerized, suddenly it's this is metaphor because there's no way to explain uh, what's on the other side. So everything I say is encoded language. So I'm sitting there, and suddenly there's this roaring sound beside me, behind me, and inside me, and it's roaring like loud, rushing ocean or a waterfall. And I had the understanding that there was a being, a divine being behind me and inside me and around me, and it took me. It sucked me right out of my body and carried me up through a tunnel, a cord, a cable, an elevator shaft, something like that, and it pulled me right up into through the tree out to the edge of the atmosphere. And when we got to the edge of the atmosphere, the world disappeared, and I was inside an infinite darkness, a void, some people call it. But I was inside a bubble, and the bubble was this intelligent entity, this angel. This angel wasn't like an angel with wings, and it's just a word I'm using. It was an intelligence and a comfort and a knowledge and a power, and I was inside of this. And it was also the divine presence itself. It was somehow separate from the fullness of the divine, but it was also a substance of the divine. It's sort of a lesser version of it, but had all of the same attributes of it. And I'm inside this bubble, and I'm in my astral self, by which I mean I don't have a physical body, but I have a spiritual body that's more or less shaped like a physical body. And so I'm inside this bubble and basically a room, and I can see out through the walls of the bubble, and I can see myself sitting in the tree way far, far, far away from me. Like it's huge distance away from me, but I can see myself there, and I'm in my astral body, looking out through my eyes, but I'm also outside of my astral body, looking at myself in my astral body. So I have all these different points of view all at the same time, and as I'm in this space, a counter appears in front of me, and in comes this sort of entity that I know is God, but it is shape shifting. It's like a cloud of smoke. It's like a bubble of water in the space station. It has this undulating sort of form to it that isn't staying as water undulating. It's becoming all these different smoke and movements and breath, and it's just constantly changing. And I know I'm like, oh, this is the divine self, and the divine self knows me, and it says to me without language, because it doesn't even have a mouth. It says to me inside myself, you belong to me. You are mine. You work for me. All these sorts of possessive ownership uh, ideas. And my response was, oh, yeah, that's right. I am. I am that thing. That is what I am. I belong to you. I work for you. Everything was totally affirmative. And the next thing I knew, I was sucked back into my body again. And I was in the tree again, and I thought, oh my gosh, I got to tell my mother that God just spoke to me. And so I jumped down out of the tree and I ran into the house and I woke up my brother, and my mother got a little upset at
Oh
me.
no.
And yes, and but she was a nice person, my mom, a loving, caring mom, but she was upset at me and told me that, oh, if you're going to work for God, that means you're going to be a priest because, Catholic Orthodox thing. You're going to be a priest, and because you're going to be a Catholic priest, you're not going to have a wife this is 1960 something, so it's very patriarchal, even in my mom.
Right.
Not going to have a wife to clean the house for you and cook for you and do your ironing, because she's at the ironing board ironing my dad's, white collar shirts. And so you're going to have to learn to do that starting now, and you're going to dust the dining room because you woke the baby. And so I learned right then, first off, that you don't come in and tell your mom that you met God, because it ends up with you doing work that you don't want to do.
Now you
And
gotta do
so
chores.
now you got to do chores. And so it was the second event that happened a year later when Ganesh came to me. And I didn't know it was Ganesh when I was a kid, but a little baby elephant of wisdom and compassion.
Oh wow.
And I realized then, having had the previous lesson, that I better not say anything to anybody about this, because nobody's going to understand this. The second time this thing happened, my little brother was now living in my room, our room, which had been my room, and suddenly I heard my name called in the middle of the night, and it was Peter, Peter, Peter. And so I sat up and I listened, and it was Peter, and I know this voice. And as I sat up and listened, I looked back and I saw myself sleeping in the bed. And then I realized that I could see in the room, but there were no lights on. Everything was a sepia tone. I could see everything in the room as if everything was illuminated from inside itself. And the voice kept calling me, and so I stood up. And when I stood up, my feet didn't touch the floor. And I was kind of amazed at that, but it wasn't scary. I was like, oh, yeah, that's normal for this. And the voice says, Peter, come to me, come to me, come to me. And so I moved toward the door, and I grabbed the door handle, but my hand passes right through the door handle. And the voice says to me, just pass through the door. Just walk through the door. So I walked right through the solid door and out into the hallway and over to the top of the stairs. And on the landing was this small elephant. And the small elephant was dressed all in these Indian clothing, sparkly mirrors and things that you see in when they used to dress up elephants. But I was like a 6-year-old kid from outside of Boston. I'd never seen such a thing in my life. But it called me and was communicating to me telepathically. Its lips never moved. And it motioned with its trunk that I come down the stairs. And I came down the stairs, and when I became a level, like eye to eye with it, I looked into one of its eyes, and it was pitch black. It was all pupil, and I fell inside the eye. I lifted up and went inside the eye, and when I went into the eye, I was in an ocean of wisdom, of understanding, of knowledge, of, I don't know how else of intellect. And then I was pulled back out of it, and I was told to go down the stairs, which I knew was against the rules of the house, and to go out of the house, which was really against the rules of my parents. But I did it anyway. It said, go outside, go outside. And so I floated down the stairs. I passed through the doorway. I went out into the street, and it said to me, while it was still up on the stairs, I could hear it in myself, as if it was present to me, and it said, "Look up." And so I looked up at the night sky, and it was full of stars. And as I looked up at the night sky, it became infinity. It suddenly became much larger, and I became much smaller in relationship to it. And it scared me. It was so huge and was just so immense that it frightened me, and I popped back into my body again. And I'm back in my body in my bedroom, and I'm sitting up, and I'm in the pitch dark, and I'm thinking about the elephant. And so I snuck out of the room, and I searched the entire house. I went in my sister's room. I snuck in my sister's room. I snuck in my parents' room. I closed their doors. I turned on all the lights in the house. I went way down into the scary cellar, into the scary closet in the
Oh my
scary cellar,
goodness.
looking for this elephant because it was so compelling to me. And I then I think I stayed up for another couple of hours just sitting there all excited. But I knew enough the next morning at breakfast not to tell my mom why I was so tired, because I'd been outside. I'd been outside. I'd been wandering the house. I'd had all the lights on in the house. I would have had to explain all this. And I decided that I was never going to talk about that. And then in the subsequent mystical events that happened later on in my life, I kept those a secret because I know that people think you're crazy. And so I came out as a near-death experiencer publicly in my little town here, around 2002-ish, 2001-ish. And then when my book came out, I came out nationally. And around the time my book came out, I died a second time of a heart attack and chose to come back that time as well. And that really set me in this new position of taking the risk to come out as a near-death experiencer, risking my credibility, my relationship with my family and all my friends, because I kept it a secret. From Even though I came out in my town in 2000, I kept it a secret between 1980 and 2001, 2002. It was still small potatoes. I kept it a secret from all of my friends. And when my book came out, and I had died that same week that the book came out, I found myself in reformed again, another new person, and willing to be open about my near-death experience. And as I was testing the waters around near-death experience, my intention all along had been to come out as a natural-born mystic, because I think that there are many people like us, Tessa, who are born with mystical experiences, and society has told us that it's taboo and we're not allowed to talk about it. And so we don't even know that each other exists. So I think that the near-death experience phenomenon, which is a type of mysticism, it has opened the door and the opportunity, at least for me, and I think for lots of other people, to begin a public conversation about what is consciousness, what is it to be a human being, what's our true relationship to each other, and what's religion all about? What's the good of it? What's the bad of it? What's the real of it? What's the fake of it? All these things are topics of conversation for the 21st century. And mysticism it's an ancient, almost, I don't want to say all religions, all major religions, because I don't know all major religions, but most major religions and all the ones I know about were all started by an individual mystic. Sikhs, Zoroastrians, Jews, Christians, Muslims, they all had a seminal figure who was a mystical genius whose experience was misunderstood by their followers and then codified and doctrinized and dogmatized into religious forms of theology. And the truth that these individuals spoke got buried underneath misunderstandings and misinterpretations.
Right.
And I think that that's important. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just agreeing with you. I think a lot of things like there is a note of truth with this. I think if a lot of religions came together instead of fighting each other or trying to be better than each other, we could get so much further. But there's so many things that are covered up or hidden away or whatnot due to man's will, as well as what you were saying, the way you interpret it, because everybody has a different interpretation. It means something different to everyone, I think. But yeah, it's pretty intriguing.
Well, when you go to an art museum and you look at a beautiful painting and you're standing there with 12 other people, and everybody has their own perspective on it because of their cultural upbringing and their education and their intelligence or their socialization, all those things play into their perception of what's going on in the painting. And I think that's true about religion, except for this one thing, is that all through the history and the centuries, there have been great mystical teachers many of whom have left us books. Some of them are thousands of years old, like the Tao Te Ching or the Yoga Sutras, that if you can read them with a mind for symbolism and metaphor instead of literalism and history, you get to see the kernels of truth that they were trying to communicate to us. And so there are tools available to pull apart the languages that were left behind for us, but for the most part, people don't even know that they talked in metaphor or symbolism or myth.
Yeah, they take a lot of things literally. And I think it's awesome as well, like there's different scripts being found every day when these different tombs and things are discovered and different things are found within them. So I think there's just more and more and more information for us to learn. But I love that description that you gave about the artwork. Like everybody sees something a little different, or it means something different to one person than it would another.
Yes, but I think also in particular with Christianity, back in the early years of its formation as an organization, they made this fatal decision to deify Jesus and made him the only begotten Son of God, which separated him from all of us, unattainable spirituality for us, if he's the totality of the divine being, which is not what he was talking about himself. You are the light of the world. You'll do greater things than I will do. I'm the light of the world. You're the light of the world. I make them one with, as I am one with you. Make them one with me. There's all about this oneness and this singleness and this unity and this that he was the same as we are. And they made him into this God that he never thought that he was, because he even said, even if the Gospels are not true, like, even if they're not historically accurate as mythology, just reading them as mythology, when he says stuff like, I only speaking out loud because the people need to hear that I'm talking to you, but I know that you hear me all the time. It's the things like that. It's that he has an interior experience of the divine, and that everything that he says in parable or in story or in action comes out of his direct personal mystical experience, which is the same for us too. There's so much there that has been missed. And I know I'm not the only one. I'm not the lone kook out here saying that, oh, you all made a mistake and you don't understand what he's talking about. I think that's been people like that all the way down through the centuries. And some of them were killed for their heresies, so-called heresies.
It's very true. I mean, you have to, I don't know, getting into that, you have to conform. Or people think you have to conform, but I don't see that as so. But I like to live my life. I mean, I sought out religion as a kid. My mom passed away, so I'm just like, okay, what's life all about? What's death all about? I went to many different churches. Even when I was in the Marine Corps, you had basically every church at your fingertips. So every weekend I'm going and checking out a different church. I was mostly raised LDS, but for me, religion is somewhat like medicine. You know, there's been times in my life when I've needed it, but I've reached the point, like you were saying, instead of being a religious person, I'm more of a spiritual person, and I find my church, you know, in my kids, in the world around me, in the forest, you know, wherever I look. And like you said, you hear that still small voice within you trying to guide you. But what I try to do is live my life as my big brother Jesus did, and just try to follow in his steps and serve my fellow man, because I think this is a really hard world that we're living in, and it's better for us to help each other out and raise each other up, as opposed to, you know, judging and ridiculing and fighting against each other.
Oh yeah. And you know here we are. We've got this Afghanistan thing going on right now, and this historic war between the Muslims and the Christians, and it all has to do with what they believe. It's all about belief, and beliefs is not even real. It's all kind of constructed in human thought. And my story is better than your story, and if you don't believe my story, I'm not just going to kill you. I'm going to annihilate your nation.
Yeah.
And all your people are going to go to my hell. Not and because your heaven and your hell don't exist. It's insane to me. It's insanity. There's a lot of good that his religion has done. Okay, I'm not feed the poor, homeless shelters, peace movements, end of slavery, all those sorts of things. But overall, when anybody sets themselves up as an absolute truth, then you're just causing trouble. Only my way is the way into God, and if you don't believe my way, then everyone. Not only are you going to hell, I'm going to help send you there. It's all about ego. It's all about self-will, and not about love. If we could only see the divine light in each other, and I know that sounds idealistic, but when you see the light inside another person, you see that they are you, and just like you, made of the same substance that you are. That's one of the after effects of near-death experience is, for me, and for lots of other NDEers like me, is seeing the light inside of everybody indiscriminately, and including the people who don't like me or who mean to hurt me. Even those people, I can't not see it in them. And if everybody could have an opportunity to see the light inside the other person, then there would be a lot more forgiveness and a lot less judging and a lot more kindness, a lot more caring. And so I'm kind of hoping that happens in the 21st century. I'm hoping that this whole near-death experience phenomenon with, maybe 100 million of us around the world, definitely, according to Pim von Lommel, this researcher out of Europe, 10 to 20 million in the United States alone. It is the more that we feel free to speak up and bring this to the forefront and have discussions about our experiences, the more other mystics who are natural born so, or come to it later in life, can have voice too, and maybe together we can nudge this whole humanity toward love. Even if we could just nudge it a degree, that would change its course over a century, over centuries, if we can help do that. By bringing more light into the world, how do we do that? Well, we talk about it, and we aim our heart at the divine, and we allow ourselves to become channels of light and peace, and just let it do its work. That's my hope for humanity anyway, especially given the circumstances that the world is in now.
That'd be very nice. I hope that does happen. That would be the most
too.
awesome
And
thing ever.
Well, that's why I'm here talking to you, Tessa. You asked me, and I don't know whether it was when we were on the mic on the show here or before, but there's a lot of near-death experiencers who are compelled to be a voice for the divine. I think of Chris Batts and Trisha Barker and Ingrid Honkala, Jeff Olson, and I could give you a long list of people who just dedicate. There's a compulsion to dedicate our lives toward exposing the light inside that lives inside us, and some of that's done with writing, and some of it Jeff does it with drumming, and Chris does it with talking to people who are suicidal. Lots of different ways to do this, but the more that we follow with the compulsion to express the divine, the more people will talk about it, I think, among themselves. The more people will begin to look into it and watch all the YouTube videos on near-death experience, and then realize that whatever their experience was, their mystical experience, maybe they got visited by a deceased loved one, which happens a lot, and then they can understand that they're not kooky or crazy, that they're part of a much larger collective of people who have credibility, and it becomes okay to talk about it. And maybe then we can discover as a society, as a culture, that it doesn't matter whether you're in Iran or Rwanda or Mongolia. If you have had a mystical experience, if you've died and come back, if you've had a visitation of the divine, then it's the same life force energy that's speaking to you as to me. And that makes us, it strips away our differences and unites us in our singularity. And the singularity is the light itself. That's my hope for the 21st century. Humanity hasn't changed a lot in the last 300,000 years. We're basically the same animal we were before, and we're tribal, and that's helped us survive for centuries, for millenniums. But now the planet's filled, and the climate is changing, which is going to force droughts and famine and all sorts of crazy stuff. That's going to disrupt society in the next century or two. And how are we going to hang together? How are we going to figure this out? We have all this technology for communication and transportation, and we're developing new technologies all the time. How do we find a way to live together peaceably? That's the one thing we've never been able to do. And I think only through love, and not human love. Human love plays a part of it, but divine love. This rush of when a person has a mystical experience, it's often accompanied by a rush of information. People call it a download. People call it telepathic. It's an infilling of divine love, in some form, whatever form it takes in you. But it's always divine love, and it leaves a residual inside us. And that's that residual that becomes a window inside ourselves back into the divine self, but also becomes a portal between us. My mystical experience can be shared with you because you had one and you understand me without language. You just have this connection, the light connection itself. And that's really what I think is going to save us, is the light connection itself, not me talking about it or you talking about it. It's making it acceptable to talk about publicly, so that people can take their, as Jesus said, take the bushel basket off your head and let your light shine. Pull your candle out from under your bed and let your light shine. Turn on the light inside yourself and let people see it. And not that it's yours, because when you experience the divine light in its fullness, you know that it's not yours, because you're not even yours, because your body is a temporary thing. It's not even who you are. And your personality and your character, these things get all left behind, and they're illusion to us who've been over there. So it's the only chance we have, I think, Tessa. I really hope that this new thing under the sun, with so many tens of millions of mystics being manufactured by science, medical science is raising the dead, causing all these, not all of them, but most of these near-death experiences, maybe we have a chance. I hope we do.
Me too. So, I know that there are a lot of people that have these near-death experiences, and it really does change a lot of people's lives, even to the point where the life they knew before sometimes may fall apart because their belief system, everything they believed in or were raised to believe in before is just kind of cast away because they know, they feel the undying truth of, like you said, the not oneness, but all of us as one, because I do think we're all a part of one thing, basically one entity. We're just little specks of light throughout the universe. We all have that light within us. Have you ever been to a group where, people get together and it's like a support group for near-death experiencers?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Back in 2015 or 16, I went to my first International Association for Near-Death Studies annual conference, which is actually coming up next weekend. I'm speaking at it. And when I went to that, it was the first time that in my life that I met people like me. I mean, I knew that people like me had existed because I read their books when I was in graduate school. All the Meister Eckhart and Rumi and Kafir and Julian of Norwich and all these people, all these dead mystics. I knew that people like me had existed in the history of the world, but I never knew any living ones. And once I got to the conference, one of the first things I did was go into the experiencers room. That's what and that's where I met a bunch of people like me, sitting around telling their stories and I would resonate with their experience and they would resonate with mine. And it was suddenly a safe place where we could talk about this and not be judged. And out of that, I've developed this thing called Mystic Tea Salon that I run on Sunday mornings. It's a live Zoom room. We've got maybe 35 people regularly. I've been running it for a year, and it's a few near-death experiencers, but there are people who have had mystical experiences of all different kinds who come and have an opportunity to speak their wisdom, because mystical experiences always come with wisdom. If it doesn't come with wisdom, it's not a mystical experience. It's like it's the thing that happens. And wisdom isn't smarts, and wisdom isn't knowledge. Wisdom is understanding a divine truth that you can't possibly have figured out on your own, and it leaves some humility in you. And so, yes, definitely for NDEers and for mystics, I've been in several groups. IANS runs this thing called ISGO, and I can't tell you what the acronym means. I don't remember. But they have experiencer groups that you can participate in on Zoom. And just for near-death experiencers at their website, ians.org, I think that's how you get into it. But more and more, the more books that are published, the more movies that are made, the more documentaries that are produced, the more conferences that are held, the more research that's done, because there's 40 years of research now, scientific research into this, the more books that are published about that, the more papers that are published about that, the more people speak up about it, the more it becomes acceptable to talk about it. And so today I do a lot of counseling, and I've been counseling an Australian who she gets up like at 7:30 this morning. It was 5:30 my time. And she had a near-death experience maybe, I'm going to guess 20 years ago. She kept it a secret like I did. I kept mine a secret for 20 years. She kept it a secret because nobody could understand her. Her rules of operation changed. Her belief systems were gone. And because her belief systems were gone, she was kind of operating on a different operating system. It would be as if she's writing what's the latest Mac operating system? It's Mojave or something. It's like she's operating on Mojave, and everybody else is operating on the first version that came out back in 1987 or 82, whatever year that was. The completely different
does not translate.
Yeah. Does not translate exactly, and and so she's been floating in the world, and she's married, and she's got grown kids. And once she started talking about it, because she started talking about it, she got a lot of pushback. Even in her yoga community and her Buddhist community gave her a ton of pushback on, oh, that didn't really happen to you, dear. Or you're a witch, or yeah, all sorts of crazy stuff like that. And so what she did is what lots of us do: we shut up, and we don't talk about it, and we don't talk about it because people repress us. Because nobody wants to be judged and lose their credibility. You lose your reputation, you lose your employment, you lose your family. It's pretty crazy. A lot of near-death experiencers, a percentage of near-death experiencers who have this happen to them when they're married end up in divorce because everything falls apart. My whole career, so I was going to be an architect, and I had been sitting at my dad's knee at his desk with a pencil in my hand since I was a little kid. And then I worked construction all the way through college, helping build houses for different construction companies so that I could have the inside knowledge about how buildings were actually put together on the ground. And I could talk to the workers and the bosses. And then I was going to go to graduate school and get my degree, and we're going to go into the business and into the family business. And that all fell apart in an instant. I'm like, I'm not doing that. I can't. When I came back, I couldn't imagine destroying any more nature. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't. How could I go? My dad asked me to go look at this property in the little city that I lived in outside of Boston that was going to get developed. And he said, why don't you stop over and take a look at that property and talk about it? They want to put in a mall there, and we can talk about whether we're going to bid on it. And this is when I was an undergraduate. And so I'm walking on this property, and all I hear the crickets, I see the blueberries, the sparrows are flying by, and the crows are overhead, and the sun is shining, and I'm like, and there's the radiance of the divine presence is pouring like an ocean, like a rising tide through all of this, like just radiating around me and filling me. And I thought, I can't do this. I can't destroy this. And I went back and I said to my dad, I'm out. I'm not, I can't do this. And, so it wasn't just me who was planning on this. It was my whole family. My sister was going in the business too. She was in architectural graduate school when this thing happened to me. And, I changed the course of my family's direction. I mean, not only did I come back.
How did they react to that? Were they angry,
weren't very happy.
Upset?
No, not angry, but like, what are you doing with your life? You're going to do what? You're going to, because I was at that point, I was talking about, as a Catholic schoolboy, I went to Catholic private school, and my senior year at St. John's for you Massachusetts people, New England, at St. John's outside of Worcester, there was a monastery nearby, St. Joseph's Abbey, and they had developed what they were calling at the time contemplative meditation, which became later centering prayer. And my religion teacher, my senior year, taught us how to do it. And I was already meditating. This is in 1977. And so that my parents knew that I had this inkling toward spiritual things. I was definitely not a religious person. I was, I was a typical teenage boy, getting away with as much as I possibly could get away with.
Right.
Right. So like every kid, and I could say
it's a growing process,
it's a growing process. It's totally fine. And but they were pretty. So they knew that I had this tendency, but they were pretty surprised and upset that because it got to the point where when I was after I graduated college, my dad helped me get a job in the State House in Massachusetts. So I was working in the State House as an aide to a representative, and I was applying to graduate schools. And my dad insisted that I apply to Harvard and Georgia Tech schools of architecture, which I did. And meanwhile, I applied to Harvard, Princeton, and Yale Divinity schools, and I got into Georgia Tech, and I got into a couple of schools, and I ended up going to Yale. And I it wasn't until I really, and I interviewed at these schools. I flew around and interviewed there, like in Atlanta, and so my family was still rooting for me to go into the business because I've been drawing my whole life, and I was kind of a natural at spatial orientation. I could orient myself in space, but I also could measure things in my head. I could look at something and say, "Oh, that's not going to fit," and it won't fit, or "Oh, that's going to fit," and it fits by like a hair. And so when I didn't do that, it changed my dad's business model. And that was really his whole future trajectory that we had been talking about. We were going to start bidding on big jobs, and not just houses and factories and schools, but like skyscrapers and things like that he wanted to do. And that all of that went away. So his dreams were tied up with my dreams. And when I realized that life itself was a dream, an illusion,
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't participate in the way that I did before. And so, yeah, it was pretty hard on them. They were supportive, when I got into a really good school. And so they're like, well, that's good. But then I finally decided what I was going to do with a degree. I was going to go become a professor. I was going to get my doctorate in mysticism and teach mysticism and hide out in academia. But when I got talked into becoming a minister, they're like, "What are you doing? Ministers live in poverty. What are you doing?" Um, so it was like a lot of people, I came back shattered. My whole world was shattered. And I was a new person, and I had to figure out how to live in the world as a new person. And I couldn't reveal to anybody. I didn't tell my parents what had happened to me. Nobody knew that I had died. I kept that a secret because I didn't even understand it. And not only did I not understand it, I couldn't talk about it because I had no language for it, which is why I went to divinity school, to figure out language to think about it. It was all kind of selfish, but it was all about how do I deal with it.
Well, yeah, and I don't really think it was selfish. I just think, like, at that moment, your whole world was flipped around, turned upside down. Like I said before, everything that you knew or was raised to know or whatnot, everything that was embedded within you, even your father's legacy, like, didn't matter anymore. And it's not that you're selfish, it's just you have that new realization that that was not the correct way, and you need to find a way to, deal with it, as well as, be able to share it with others. But, I mean, I don't know. I don't feel like you were being selfish, but maybe just because of, your raising and whatnot, you feel like you were being selfish, or other people may have felt like you were being selfish, but I don't feel like you were.
I was doing what I had to do in order to survive in the world. But I, yeah, I struggled with disappointing my family. I struggled with that. And, if I had gone into architecture, I still would have been the same way that I am now, an alien in the world. And I think I made the best choice. I think for me, I was never going to be able to live in that world of architecture is a clean world, but construction is kind of gritty.
Yeah, very dirty.
And yeah, and it would have been very difficult, I think. I think we would have succeeded, but my heart wouldn't have been in it because I really didn't care anymore about building buildings. I just didn't care. I didn't care. I was more. It's like all the things. There were things that I liked when I was younger, following the Bruins, paying attention to the Red Sox. What are the Patriots doing? And after my near-death experience, I didn't care at all. I still don't.
Everything changes. You have a new
Because-
perspective. And I don't want to
new
interrupt
perspective,
because, yeah, we're going to a good place here, but we do have to go to our first music break.
Yeah,
So-
right.
On this break, we have Miss Tracy Cruz from Oakland, California. She's going to be singing Joyful Rain. And then we have Michaelan Hay from Ontario, Canada. This girl is fresh out of high school. She is so talented. You can even find her on YouTube. She's going to be singing Pins and Needles, Mirror, and Devil You Know. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this musical break.
Your love flows through me like water from the rain. It flows right through me. You've cleansed my soul and washed away all the pain. You wash every part. Your love lifts higher than all of the stars in the sky. So high. I may not wish on you to be by my side. You loving me, I feel like flying. You loving me, I feel like crying. Tears of joy fall from the sky to make us smile. Talking on pins and needles, every word through a microscope. You keep stomping down on the ground while I've been stuck on this tightrope. I just wanna say what I wanna say without your sentence. I'm not willing to do the time when I'm innocent, and I'm innocent. Talking on pins and needles. Talking on pins and needles. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. Walked on my share of thin ice with your blowtorch at my feet. You won't ever see me beg, so take this tongue off your leash. I'm gonna say what I wanna say, don't need permission. Interpret it how you want, it's my decision. Talking on pins and needles. Talking on pins and needles. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. Dancing on shattered glass, kicking the pieces all around. My safety has been broken, this is now a hunting ground. Talking on pins and needles. Talking on pins and needles. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, Better the devil you know. Better the devil you know. Better the devil you know. Better the devil you know.
Very nice. Welcome back, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. Tonight we're joined by Peter Panagore. He's wicked awesome. Welcome back, Peter, and thanks so much for hanging out with us and enlightening us.
Oh, it's a wicked good time I'm having here.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tessa. I appreciate being here. And for those of you who are just joining us, I grew up outside of Boston, and I had a Boston accent. We were chatting about it off air. I don't have one now. Why? Because it was trained out of me. Anyway, you were going to ask me a question that you refrained from asking during the break.
Okay,
Something
so I was
about
just...
where I had gone.
Yeah, I was very interested in your experience up on the mountain and what drew you in the first place to go to Alberta, Canada. And when it says your partner, is that like your life partner, or is that someone that you used to work with?
It was my climbing partner.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was just a guy that I climbed with. So why was I in Alberta? I was in Alberta because I was actually in Montana. And I was in Montana because I went on national student exchange because I had to get away from my family because of my sister had vanished when I was 14, ran away. But from our point of view, it was vanishing. And it was a traumatic thing for my whole family. And it left my mom. It's like when someone dies in your family, but you can't ever stop intensively grieving for them because there's no what they call closure. Mm-hmm. So it was always this open wound. And by the time I was a junior or a sophomore, actually, I was like, I'm out of here. And so I went on student exchange and I went to Bozeman, Montana. And come that spring break, I did not want to go back to Boston. So I was an outdoors person. I was National Ski Patrol, working at Bridger Bowl. I'd been a Boy Scout almost my entire life, backpacking and camping all over New England, in the winter, also not just in the summer, but all season backpacking and camping. And so come spring break, I decided that I was going to do something exciting. I was out west, I was going to go have an adventure and not go back home. So I went to the outing club to find out, I was a member of the outing club, to find out if anybody had a trip planned. And yes, on the bulletin board outside, there was a fellow by the name of Tim, who I didn't know, who was advertising a 10-day snow caving and ice climbing trip in Alberta and British Columbia. And so we got together and we had conversation, and turned out we had complementary skill set. And he was a certified lead climber, and we'd both done some snow caving and done a lot of backcountry skiing, and we decided we could do this together. So we went off on this trip, and we drove up from Bozeman up to Banff. And north of Banff, we took a left turn into British Columbia, and we went snow caving for 8 days in near a place called Mount Assiniboine. Is that right? Is that on Assiniboine?
It sounds
But anyway,
familiar.
and British, I think it is. And so we skied into there, and we had snow caving, and we had this great adventure for 8 days, and got to know each other and trust each other, because it's 30 below at night. This sounds like a lark, but you got to be super careful because the weather can kill you. So our packs weighed 70 pounds, and most of that was food and warm clothing. So that's a lot of weight to carry, but it was necessary. And so we did, and we had a really great trip. And on the way out, Tim had planned a 1-day ice climb on the world famous Weeping Wall on a mountain called Cirrus Mountain. And as I mentioned, Tim was a certified lead climber, newly certified. And I'd been a rock climber, a technical climber, but I'd never done ice climbing. And so I had to borrow or come up with gear, So I came up with all the gear I needed, except for I didn't come up with 2 ice axes. I came up with 1 ice axe because that's all I could find, and I couldn't afford to buy one. So I borrowed that axe, and I borrowed a hammer. A hammer is significantly shorter, say 6 inches, and the axe is a couple of feet. The hammer is used for chipping ice and putting in ice screws and taking out ice screws, but you can use it to climb because it has the same sort of bird beak pick on the end of it. You can plant it in the ice and hang on it. But the big difference is that, well, there's 2 big differences. One, with the hammer, it's shorter, so the swing of the plant is all your arm, and there's no you can't plant it 3 feet above your head. You can only plant it 2 inches above your head, and above your hand, the extension of your hand. And the axe you could make this huge swing and plant it way above you, and then let go of the handle and dangle on a strap. So you could relax, open your hand, and you let go of the axe. The strap is around your wrist with a little bead so that the strap is tight to your wrist. You could just let go of the axe and it just stays there. So you can hang there and rest, but you can't do that with a hammer. So with the complications with the hammer, the shortened swing, the more power I had to use from my arm to plant it, and that I had to hang on to it with squeezing my fist, using my forearm, never rest my forearm. All of this combined to slowing our climb down significantly by hours compared to the other teams that were climbing that day. So by the time we reached the top of the climb, this 3-pitch climb, it was sunset and all the other teams had left. We watched the last team walk out from 600 feet up. And you can't just stop climbing. You can't just stop climbing. You have to go up to the top and take the rappels down. It's not like backpacking where if it gets late or the weather turns, you can go back to down the trail you came up. You can't do that. You got to go up. You can't go down until you're and the rappelling places. And so we had to complete the climb, and we knew hours before we got to the top of this climb what kind of situation we were in. And when we got to the top of the climb and the sun set, the temperature dropped about 30 degrees in minutes, and instantly hypothermia began. We began with shivers, violent body racking, like a sewing machine sort of vibration in the body, jumping all over the place of shivering, which is the body trying to keep itself warm.
Yeah.
And yeah.
That gets painful really fast. I hate that feeling.
You've had that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a rare person who knows what I'm talking about. The jaw starts to clatter like a cartoon, and unlike a cartoon, it's not funny. It's painful, and you're not in control, and you can't. It's hard to do anything if every one of your muscles is twitching. It's really hard to hold on to anything, and so Tim hauled up the rope, and it became a 300-foot knot because it's a double line that we were climbing on, and in the dark, I had to untangle this while I was violently shivering. So this took a long time, and I had to have my gloves off. And so that frostbite started setting in. And while we sat there in the dark without any more food or water, because it's a day climb, and nobody carried up food and extra food and water, we consumed what we had. It was gone. And we didn't have our sleeping bags because nobody brought sleeping bags on the climb because you were going back down again, and it's only 600 feet. And we discussed our situation, and we knew that we were in a deadly situation and that we were probably going to die where we were. And we talked about snuggling up against the rock together, canoodling, but we realized that we didn't have enough body heat left to make that practical, and that we would be losing heat rapidly even if we did snuggle together because we were already violently cold. So we decided that the only chance we might have for survival was to get down in the dark 600 feet on 3 rappels. And so that's what we did. We We pulled up the rope, we untangled the rope, we tied each other together, and we traversed in the dark across the edge of the cliff to the first rappel. And we made a next mistake. And that was, we were supposed to take a piece of webbing, which is this flat nylon tube you tie it in a square knot and make a loop out of it. It's what climbers use for a lot of things. And we were supposed to take this piece of webbing loop and tie it and wrap it around the tree and put the rope through the webbing itself instead of putting the rope around the tree, because if you put the rope around the rope could freeze to the tree and then you can't get it down. But we decided together that webbing was expensive and we didn't want to leave a piece of webbing up there. So we wrapped the rope around the tree instead of through the webbing, and we descended. And the last maybe 30 feet or so, or something like that, was an inverted overhang. So we were bouncing on the rock with our feet as we rappelled, but the last 30 feet we were in free fall on the rope, no bouncing against the rock because we couldn't reach it. So we get to the bottom of this rappel and we tried to pull the rope down, but the rope was frozen to the tree and stuck. And with both of our weight pulling on one side of the rope, we couldn't get it free. It was not moving. So we yanked and yanked and yanked on this thing, and the snow's knee deep, and hypothermia is advancing, and we're losing our physical coordination, because that's one of the things that happens with hypothermia. You start to not think straight, and our jaws were freezing. It was difficult to speak. Our lips it was hard to form words, and we were keeping our cool. That was one of the great things that we learned about each other the week before when we were snow caving, is that neither of us were panickers. We talked about panicking. We talked about keeping our cool, and we kept our cool. Neither of us freaked out, even though we knew how desperate the situation was, and how the situation was worsening moment by moment. So when we couldn't get the rope free, Tim, being the responsible person that he was, said, I'm going to reascend the rope and get the rope free, which is 150 feet of going back up the rope without protection, meaning he wasn't going to be able to set ice screws or chocks. He was going to have to he tied these hitches called Persic hitch. I hope I'm saying that word right. I know I said it wrong sometimes. It's an ascender's hitch. It's a friction hitch like a clove hitch that needs tension in the line to stay tight. But the way that it works is you tie this particular hitch on you get two very thin lines, and you tie one on one side of the rope and tie one on the other side of the rope, and there are these very long loops that you leave that reach from your hand down to your foot, and you put one foot in one loop and one foot in the other loop, and then the other guy, me, takes the ends of the two rope, the two ends of the one rope, wrapped it around my waist, and rolled in the snow, and it's about 4 feet of snow, rolled in the snow to make the rope as taut as possible so that it could possibly ascend with as little movement in the line as we could make it. And Tim began the climb, and he ascended up the rope. And I wasn't looking because my face was in the snow, but he must have gone up 20 feet or so, 25 feet or so. I don't really know exactly. But at one point he shouted, "Falling!" And that's the sign. That's what climbers say when they're falling. And falling! And so I rolled out of the way, and he half landed on me in the soft snow and wasn't hurt, but the rope had come free. So the rope's free. We coil the rope back up, and we have to get over to the next rappel. And around this time, this is the middle of nowhere. The Icefields Parkway is super beautiful, like really, really gorgeous from end to end. And it's very isolated. I don't know what the population of Alberta was at the time, but they all lived in the city, and very few people lived out in the mountains. So there was no traffic. And a truck came down the highway. down the parkway and pulled into the parking lot across the street where the car was, which we could see. And this truck turned and faced the slope and flashed its lights. And we jumped up and down, waving our arms, and he flashed his lights like he could see us. And we deduced that it was the warden, because because the night before we had driven up to Jasper and bought some food. And by the time we got back to the climb, it was after dark, and we didn't know where to set up our tent. And so we went to the warden's cabin, and we talked him into letting us spend the night in the cabin and a couple of bunks. And and our treat was to cook him breakfast and dinner and breakfast. So we cooked him dinner, and we cleaned up, and he had a nice dinner, and then we cooked him breakfast, and off we went. And we signed into the log saying what we were going to do: 1 day climb, Lower Weeping Wall, time in. And then what happens is you have to go back to the warden's cabin and sign out. We never did. So he came looking for us. So we were now heartened. He's in the parking lot across the street. He's flashing the lights. We're jumping up and down. We're like, oh my God, this is great. And somebody knows we're here. So we're feeling encouraged. We traverse over to the next rappel, and now we're off the ice and we're on rock. And it's in a sort of a crevice. It's not really a crevice. It's sort of like a turn in the rock. So it's in a shadow. It's in the moon shadow. And it has an iron pin and a ring, and we put the rope through that, and we descend down this rocky face that's rough rock. It's not smooth. And we turn the corner at the bottom onto the ledge where the next rappel is set up. And Tim goes to the end, to my left, and there's a strap that's permanently installed in the mountain to clip your harness into with carabiners. So he's clipped into the mountain now with an iron pin pinned into the mountain. And I'm to his right. And once we get there, we turn around and the warden's there, and he flashes his lights, and we wave, and he drives off because we have one rappel left. And it's late. I don't even know what time it is. Midnight, 2 a.m. I have no idea. And he waited. That fella, he waited for quite a while watching us do this. So I took one end of the rope, and I tied it to my harness, and I took the other end of the rope and I tossed it off to the side, out to the right, around this corner into this darkness, and pulled on the rope, and it jammed on my first pull. I didn't even get a foot. I pulled it that much maybe, and it jammed. And now I can't get the rope free, and you can't go back up the rope because it's a 150-foot drop. If the rope comes free, you're dead. And we're now desperate. We didn't I can't get the rope free, and now our hypothermia has advanced. My feet are frozen like blocks of ice. I can't feel my feet, and my hands have frostbite. My face has frostbite. I still have all my digits, letting people know it wasn't 3rd degree. It was blistery frostbite, and so I have frostbite. My face, my feet, my hands, my cognitive functioning continues to decline because it's getting colder and colder as the night goes on, and we are out of food, and we have no more energy left. We weren't even talking. Every time we spoke, we felt our energy drain. A single word tapped the resources that we had left and that we needed to survive the night. So we spoke very little, only as necessary. And we were careful about every movement we made too, because every movement we made, any wasted effort was lost energy for survival. And meanwhile, inside my head, I know that my mammalian brain, or maybe it's my reptilian brain, way deep down inside me, is all about survival. My drive, my willpower to survive was something that I didn't know that I had. And I dug it to such a depth inside myself that night that I have never got to the bottom of it since. I have a lots of willpower, and I've never got to the place where I've exhausted it ever again. And I was driving myself forward. I'm keeping my head, but I know that I'm going to die. I'm going to die. I know death is here. I've been on the ski patrol, as I mentioned, and we're trained in this. So Tim can't help me pull the rope because the rope is tied to my harness, and we're afraid that if I untie the rope for him to put a hand on it, that I'll drop the rope and then we are going to die. So as long as I had the rope tied to me, we had a chance, but neither of us believed it. So the night progresses, and I keep trying to pull the rope, and then the further hypothermia continues. I get warm, and I unzip my coat, which is what happens.
No.
And Tim scolded me, and he was right, but I didn't care. I was like, I don't care. I'm hot. Even though I wasn't hot, I was freezing to death. And what it felt like to me was that all of my blood was rushing from my extremities to my core. I remember thinking, "Oh, I need the blood in my heart. I need the blood in my lungs. I need the blood in my brain. I don't need my fingers. I don't really need my feet. I can survive without my feet." All the blood's rushing into me, and I'm feeling hot, so I unzip my coat, and this feeling of peace comes over me at this point, because now I know that I'm going to die. Even though I know that I shouldn't unzip my coat, I also know that this is it. There's only a couple of stages left, and I can't get the rope free. And so this feeling of peace overcomes me, and I remember looking around at the mountain that was across the street and the snow on the mountain, and thinking about my family, and sort of giving up. I was like, okay, it's going to be okay for me. I'm going to die here. And I was sad for my parents because they were going to lose another kid. And I knew that was going to break my mom, because the first experience was already breaking her. But there was nothing I could do about it. And then I began to fall asleep. And I fell asleep several times. And when I fell asleep, my body would collapse. I would black out. I mean, it was like instant falling asleep. I'm awake. It's like a little baby. Little baby's awake, and then it's asleep. There's no in between. I was awake, and then I'd be asleep, and into darkness of sleep. So I would fall asleep, and my body would collapse, and I'd land on the rock. It'd smack my head with my helmet, and wake up, and stand back up again, and pull on the rope, and then I stood up this one time. And as I looked around, my peripheral vision was circled by blackness, like a spotlight. My tunnel vision, I had tunnel vision. And as I looked around, wondering what was going on, because I never experienced tunnel vision before, my tunnel of vision collapsed into darkness, and it just blinked out, and I couldn't see anymore. And I thought, I'm falling asleep. And then I thought, no, I'm still awake. Why can't I see anything? Why don't I feel like I'm standing? Why don't I feel like I fell? I was confused. I didn't understand what was going on. And as I was in this confusion, in what would have been the front of my body opened up, just like the mountain, where the mountain had been, just opened up into this vast, infinite darkness. But I could see this darkness. It wasn't darkness like when you close off all the windows and pull down all the shades and shut the door, and you shut off the lights, and you're in a super dark room and you can't see your hand. It wasn't like that. I could. It was darkness. It was dark and darker, but I could see in it. And way far in the distance, infinitely far in the distance, there was a pinprick of light in the darkness, and it was a billion light years away. I have no idea how far it was away, but it was infinitely far, and immediately started rushing toward me. And as it came toward me faster than the speed of light, it communicated to me directly inside myself, telepathically, without language. It said, "I'm taking you." And as it rushed toward me, it filled my vision with light. This light expanded as it came toward me so fast, and I put up all of my willpower as a resistance to it. All of the willpower that I developed through the night, like a shield. You're not taking me, I thought. And it reached through my resistance inside of me and just grabbed me and took me. And the next thing I knew, as I was resisting, I was very upset. to stop this thing. But as soon as I was pulled out of myself, I was enveloped inside of love and compassion and contentment and intelligence and power. And I was a rag doll. I had no agency. I couldn't control what was going on. I relaxed into this ride. I was inside of this angel, and it rushed it rushed up its own tunnel. And when it got to the end of where it was going, suddenly I popped out of it into this much larger darkness than I'd ever seen before. Infinity in every direction. But again, I could see, but I no longer had a body. I was, it's all metaphor that I'm using. I was an orb of consciousness that was 10,000 times bigger than my physical body. I was enormous, and I could see in every direction at once. I had 10,000 eyes, or I was a single eye that could see everywhere at once. So that I could see infinity everywhere, and yet I was myself, and I was content. I thought to myself, because my thinking was my being, was my seeing, was myself, that this energy consciousness was me, and this is me. How did I forget myself? How did I not know? How did I not know this was me? This is truly me. And I was content. I didn't know where I was, but I was content being there. And then I describe it as a door in my book, a gigantic door, and I give it dimensions of like 70 yards by 30 yards, but that's metaphor again. It's like a portal, like an opening. There was a rending, a ripping of the darkness, and this light began to cascade over this opening like a waterfall. And this waterfall of life was transparent and translucent and solid at the same time, and I could see all of these things at once. I could see through it, and when I looked through it, there was a long arcing tunnel that went off into infinity, and I was meant to go in that direction. But I also could see the thickness of this pearlescent light that was flowing like water. And I could see the surface of it all at the same time. And I was compelled to touch it. It was so beautiful. It was so attractive that I reached with my consciousness to touch it. And as I touched it, all these things happened at once. It filled inside of me. It surrounded me. It was all living life. It was all wisdom. It was all beauty. It was all power. It was all consciousness. It was everything there was in the universe, the maker of everything there was in the universe, pouring inside of me. And I tell this part in sequence, but it all happened all at once. And I could hear my name being called, but not Peter, but the name of my soul, the created, the name that called my soul into being, that calls my soul into being, because I'm in timelessness. There's no past, there's no future. There's all past and future and all kinds of other time that run in different directions, in different ways. They're all in the present nowness of my experience. So I hear my name being called, and it's being called for eons and eons, creating me forever and ever. But it's all right now. And I know that this calling of my soul name is the essence of my being. And I know that I'm known. I know that this is the all-knower. And I know that I am all known, and that there is nothing of me that's hidden. And I go through a hell. And the hell I enter into is all of the pain that I gave away in my life from the point of view, I witness it, I experience it from inside the body and the brains of everyone I hurt in my life, every single thing that I'd done to them. in a sequence, in a chronology of pain. And all the pain that I intended to give them turned out to be much larger, 10,000 times larger, more intensive than I had any idea. So when I thought I was giving away a drop of suffering on purpose, my intent was to hurt, it turned out I gave away a lake full. And I experienced that lake full of suffering. And juxtaposed to every single experience was all of my decisions that I had made when I was alive to cause that pain. Why I was causing the pain, what I was going to do to cause the pain, and the joy I felt in causing the pain. And the juxtaposition of these two things, the immensity of the pain, which actually ended up I gave to myself and not to the other person. All this pain was actually in me that I gave away. I judged my judgments for causing the pain as guilty and shameful. And meanwhile, it wasn't that I was bad. I could see that all of humanity was in the same circumstance as me. That the algorithm that was written for the universe included suffering, and that there's no way to have a universe without suffering, because suffering is limitation. And unlike unlimitedness has no suffering. Limitedness has suffering. That all humanity, it wasn't our fault. We didn't write the code. It wasn't my fault that I caused this pain. Yes, I made willful choices about it, and yes, I was responsible for it. But the coding itself was the design of the game, of the reality, and the voice of the divine. Was inside of me and around me, and it was speaking to me. Like the whole of this fullness, this illuminated darkness in which I was speaking inside of me, saying, I love you. I made you. I know you. I've always known you. I love you as you are. I love you with the suffering you caused. I love you because I made you, because you are mine, because I love you. I forgive you. And when I heard this, I turned to face it with my heart. And all this forgiveness, all this beauty, love, joy, adoration, wholeness, healing, end of suffering, wellness, beauty, paradise, compassion, knowledge, understanding, wisdom, all these things flooded into me, and they weren't separate packets of information like the words I just said. They were all one thing. They were a unity of the divine experience, and I was not just infilled with it, I was inflated by it. I became much larger with the divine presence in me, and I was in utter union of bliss. And I saw the origin of my soul, the essence of my divine being, as I describe it as a photon of light. I was a singular photon of light, and I could see the infinite nature of all of the photons that comprise the divine self in a massive, infinite amount of light that was radiant, and I was a portion of it, separate from it, but of the same substance of it. It was a bazillion times bigger than me, but I was still the same as it, even as an individuated particle of light. And I was superpositioned. I was the light and the divine, but I was this other smaller packet, a photon packet of one photon of divine light. And I could also see the expanse of the size of my soul in comparison to my human lives or my other incarnated lives, which were super teeny and tiny. And there were many of them, but none of them, even in aggregate, came anywhere near the size of my actual self. They were all so much smaller than the and younger than the eons old expanse of my soul. And I could see my lives in other universes, other worlds, but they were all at once because I was in timelessness. Were they in sequence? Were they on Earth? Were they in another body? I can't tell you now. I just know that I had seen them, and I wasn't, there's a lot of knowledge I wasn't allowed to bring back with me. I could only bring back a very singular 0.001% of what I was shown. And in the midst of all of this, I began to understand my selfness, and I wanted to understand the cosmos. I wanted to know everything there was to know about the cosmos, all the way the things are made, and what they're made of, and atoms and quarks, and why people cause love and have suffering, and all the answers to all the questions I had in one single question: what is the cosmos itself? And all that knowledge was filled into me in an instant, and I understood. And even though I understood, I also knew that I couldn't see into infinity itself, and there was so much more that I did not understand. And then sort of my Peterness asserted itself again, and I asked if I was dead, and the voice said, "Yes, you're dead." And I said, "Well, my parents on Earth are suffering from my sister's disappearance, and if I die, they're going to lose a second child that's going to ruin them." And in that question, the answer came when I was pulled across heaven to the edge of heaven at the beginning of the universe, and I could see all the galaxies in the universe, and I could see our galaxy, and I could see our star system, and I could see Earth in particular, and I was still in heaven, and I was in the ocean of love, the love that is, it's inexpressible. I can't even tell you how big it is. It was, is, and will be. It was the totality of the divine self itself. The infinity is made of love. And it said to me, in the way that I love you now know that I have always loved you. And I could see the immensity of love for me in particular, which was immense compared to all of the love that I'd ever experienced on earth. And then I could see inside every human heart. I could see every single person living on earth at that moment. And I could see that they all had light inside them and were utterly beloved. I felt like I was the prodigal child, the special, most beloved teacher's pet, beloved of God. But I could also see that everybody was that. In the particularity of how much I was loved was how much love God had for every single person, and that everyone was made of divine light, and that all was well, is well, and will be well for every single soul. And I could see that all the souls on earth were covered over with a thick foam of forgetfulness, and that they couldn't even see the light inside themselves, let alone see the light inside anybody else or in heaven itself where I was. There was a blindness of necessity for existence, I guess. And I could see my parents' faces in particular. And I could see their suffering that they would endure in life without me. And I could see their less suffering that they would endure in life with me. And I said, I haven't gone through the door yet. The tunnel, I haven't gone all the way yet. I have another commitment. I was leaving in a theater company tour for 6 months. Well, I guess it was 4 months, but it was a year of rehearsal. This national theater tour I was in through the university, and I had made a commitment, and I said I made a promise to come back, and the voice made no response to that. And I said, can I go back to my life? If I can come back here, can I go back to my life so that I can protect the woundedness of my parents? And the voice said, it's your time to come home. We want you to come home. But no, you don't have to. We want you to, but you don't have to. I said, well, then can I come back to this divine union? And the voice said, yes, you can come back to this heaven. And I said, well, then I choose to live my life. And the voice said, you won't live your life. And sent me back. And as I went back, I approached a million different openings that all of them led to my body, but each one of them was an individual life path. I could choose a life path. And in the middle of all of these was the divine light of intensity itself. And as I approached this, was traveling such a far distance from heaven to get to this entry point, I saw the light in the center of all of the possible entry points, and how it radiated out through many of the points. And I remember thinking to myself, I want some autonomy. I don't want to give up my whole self. I want to be a writer. I want to do some creativity, and I want some choice in my life. And that was my decision. The voice had said to me, choose. And I chose, and I entered that portal that was also enveloped in light, but not in the very core of the light. And then I was crushed down and put into atomic form and shoved inside my body, and had forgotten what pain was and suffering was. And my first encounter with the world was all pain again. And as I was coming back to consciousness in my body, as my brain was coming back online, I began to feel my body being jostled, and it was so painful. Physicality was, I had forgotten what pain was. And eventually I started to hear, and I was being pulled up, and it was Tim helping me stand. And he was screaming at me, and it took a while for me to understand what he was saying. And he was crying and yelling, you were dead, you were dead. If you die, I was going to die. And then he told me to pull the rope after some period of time. And I was completely confused. I didn't know where I was or who he was or what a rope was. But pretty soon I began to remember what I was and where I was. And he had me pull the rope, and the rope came free on the first pull. And we descended, and we got the tent, and we self-treated for hypothermia until we were warm enough to get into the car and turn on the heater. And I tell that very quickly, but it took quite a while to get our body temperature back up again. And then the ranger showed up, and he asked if we were the boys on the mountain that night. We said, yes, sir. He said, well, I came to see if I had to get the helicopter to collect your bodies. And off he went. And I was not the same person. I was a completely different person. Everything was flat to me, like a two-dimensional world. And I didn't know who I was anymore. I knew I was Peter, but that had no grounding anymore. Everything was fake to me, thin, ugly, unreal, weak, broken, limited, suffering. And off we went.
That's amazing.
And I became an entirely different person. And other terrible things happened on that ride home. We got arrested. We totaled the car. It was bad. It was a terrible trip home. We separated. I had to hitchhike back to Bozeman. I ended up with a stutter. I had a stutter right through after I graduated from college. I was hitchhiking off of Martha's Vineyard. Martha's Vineyard. Martha's Vineyard. And I had gone down to see my sweetheart, and I got picked up by this guy who heard my stutter, and on this ride to Boston told me how to stop it. How do you stop your stutter? You stop talking, he said. That's all you do. You just stop. And I've worked on controlling my stutter ever since. But I still have it as of that night. It still shows up sometimes.
Do you think it's because you got so cold, or just because of, how you came back into this world and the trauma?
I was terrified. Yeah, it was all trauma. It was very traumatic. And I now I can tell my story without crying, but for the first 10 years or longer when I was telling my story, until 2016 when I went back to Alberta to go to Weeping Wall to face my trauma, I cried every single time I told this story because it was just brutalizing to me. It still brings me into there's still a lot of it that brings me into a dark space of pain. But in 2016,
well, before we go to 2016, I'm going to have to cut you off there. We are going to go to our second music break. And I can't wait to hear what you're about to say. I really don't want to go to break, but we gotta. So on this break, once more, we have Miss Tracy Cruz from Oakland, California. She's going to be singing Flowers and Candy featuring Lonnie Dotson, as well as Electricity and Emotional Love. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this musical break.
To make things right.
gives me the energy to move beyond my capabilities. There is no limit to what your love can do. I feel chemistry whenever you're close to me, and I cannot explain your energy, 'cause you're pulling me like gravity. It feels so strong, I cannot escape your electricity. This rush keeps flowing through to my veins. This feeling's insane and I can't explain. I will never be the same. I will never be the same. Rush keeps flowing through to my veins. This feeling's insane and I can't explain. I will never be the same. I will never be the same. Physical attraction holds us like a magnet, and I cling to you like static, and I can't let go. Your love is so dynamic, makes me a fanatic, got me feeling ecstatic. Will my heart come to this rush flowing through to my veins? This feeling's insane and I can't explain. I will never be the same. I will never be the same. Rush keeps flowing through to my veins. This feeling's insane and I can't explain. I will never be the same. I will never be the same. Rush keeps flowing through to my veins. This feeling's insane and I can't explain. I will never be the same. Straight right through your heart. I will never be the same. Rush flowing through to my veins. This feeling's insane and I can't explain. I will never be the same. I will never be the same. You know what you've done to me. I feel so excited, feeling strong and I can't fight it. Oh, do you know what you've done to me? Got me feeling so inspired, set my heart and soul on fire. Let's create a love that's strong. Let's make life a happy song. Let's bring joy to everything. Let's enjoy what life brings. Let's create a love that's so strong. Let's make life a happy song.
confused in the past. It's been put down, it's been shattered, and then I'm left without any clue to know the real truth about what I found. But with you I found my common ground. Your love makes me emotional, 'cause you're the one that makes me feel emotional. You make me feel that love is real, 'cause you're the one that makes me feel emotional. Ever since I was young, my mom said love makes you strong when everything goes wrong and you can't go on. I believe the love you have for me surpassed infinity. That's why you're all I see. Your love makes me emotional, 'cause you're the one that makes me feel so emotional. Love is real, 'cause you're the one that makes me feel. Your love makes me emotional. Your love, 'cause you're the one that makes me feel so emotional. Love is real, 'cause you're the one that makes me feel. What you have is magical. We feel so emotional. You move me so I can't let go. I can't let go. You touch my soul, I can't let go. I can't let go. 'Cause what we have is magical. Your love's emotional. Your love makes me emotional. 'Cause you're the one that makes me feel emotional. Can't you see you do something to me? Oh, I can't let go. You make me feel, your love's emotional, so emotional, so emotional. It feels so real to me. It feels so real to me. It feels so real to me. It feels so real, yeah. Makes me feel, emotional.
Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining us tonight on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. Tonight we're joined by Mr. Peter Panagore. Welcome back, Peter, and thank you so much for hanging out with us and sharing your story. It's been very interesting, to say the least. Oh my gosh, I cannot even imagine what you went through. Even hearing the story is just crazy.
Yeah, it was a crazy night, that's for sure. Left me with trauma. What were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, so you actually went back and faced your fears. You went back to the area where this happened. Can you tell us what happened with that?
Sure. My book had come out, and I was doing book signings in different places, and a woman came, and she took an interest in my book and in me, and at one point she asked me, "Have you ever been back?" I said, "No." And she said, "Why not?" And I said, "Well, because, not in the budget, not important." She said, "No, I'll pay for your trip." I was like, "Really?" She said, "Yep." So she paid for everything: flight, hotels, car rental, leaving my car at the airport.
Wow.
And yeah, exactly. And a buddy of mine who lives near me here on the coast, a guy I had just sort of met, um, went out with me, and he had introduced me to a Native American elder named Jim Miller from Pine Ridge, who runs sweat lodges up in North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Alberta, British Columbia for younger people. And he had flown out east to meet with me because this, I should tell you what happened. Okay, why I didn't meet this guy? It's crazy. My new friend Jeff had come to a couple of workshops that I had run, and he took my book and he sent it out to Jim, and I didn't know Jim at this point, but Jim was off away, and Jim was up running a sweat lodge up in Alberta, and so his wife on the in Pine Ridge on the reservation got the book and read it, and when Jim got back, he said, I had this crazy vision when I was in the sweat lodge, and the creator, Great Spirit, said to me, I have to go up to this mountain and leave an offering north of Banff. So I did, but I don't know what that was all about. And she said to him, oh, you got to read this book. What mountain was it? He said, it was Cirrus Mountain. She said, well, that's the mountain in this book. And so he read the book, and he then flew out east to meet me. And we had this conversation on not far from my house. We spent about 5 hours together. And he said, Peter, I don't know why I had to give that offering at that mountain, but I know it was about you. And I think our paths are going to intersect at some point. And he flew back west. And so then this woman, meanwhile, says, I'm going to pay for your trip. And my buddy Jeff says, I'm going to go with you, and we'll get Jim we'll meet with Jim. And so when we got up to Banff, Jim and a guy named Smokey, who, God rest his Smokey's soul, he's passed away since then, passed on. They did a little ceremony with me, gave me a new name. They gave me the name Nagi Wichachanupa, which means two-soul man. Because one of the things that Jim had noticed about me is I had a lot of trauma. He was a Vietnam vet. Mm-hmm. And he noticed my behavior, my traumatic life behavior, and he said, you got a lot of trauma there, Peter. So when I got up there, they did this little ceremony and gave me a new name and gave me a quilt. I'm sitting on the quilt right now as we speak. It had been a veteran's quilt that he gave to me, a warrior's quilt. And he said, this is what you got to do, Peter. You got to go up to the mountain and you got to call your soul back. And you got to scream it out as hard as you can. You got to call your soul back. You got to go up there and you got to meditate. Got to call your soul back. So I did. I did what he said. I went up to the mountain and we snowshoed in because it was a lot of snow. It was December. And so we snowshoed in and nobody was there that day but us. And I called my soul back. I screamed, I want my soul back. Give me my soul back. Because I still live this way, that most of me isn't here. Most of me is outside of myself, above myself, looking through me. Mm-hmm. That's part of the disassociation experience that I have regularly. That's my life. But the craziest thing happened is that all the spot where I actually died, I could see the spot where I actually died. And it was no longer this dark, terrifying place of leaving. It became, because of my facing of my fears, it became an entry place of integration. And the biggest change was, when I tell my story, I no longer cry all the way through it. And I wasn't crying because I wanted to cry. I just was crying because the trauma was so intense. So from 2016, it took about a year and a half for it to really work itself into me. But I no longer suffer from all the trauma that I had that night. I've been healed, not 100%, right? It's still got some darkness with it, but it's not terrifying to me. It doesn't rip me open every time I tell the story. It's more about being in the world now with the light, as opposed to that place representing to me the trauma of my dying, because it was terrifying. I don't know if without the tears whether my terror comes through my storytelling now, but I was terrified for hours and hours and hours as we fought to get off this mountain face. But the biggest difference for me now is that I don't cry when I tell the story, but also that I'm easier in the world now. It's easier for me to be here now. I don't always dying the second time. I had died a year before this. It combined that with the going back to where I died the first time. I'm more at rest, at ease with being alive, because I wasn't. I prayed for my death every single day for 20 years. And I would go, I'd do my meditation and my Kriya yoga, and then I would say some words like, take me home today. Today's a good day to die. Why don't you take me home? I want to go home. It's time for me to go home. Why don't you take me back again? And I lost my anger. I was pretty angry at God for a long period of time because I didn't know what I was getting into. When I agreed to come back, when I asked to come back, I didn't realize and understand what God meant when God said, you won't live your life. But I haven't lived my life. My life was over. I was a new person. And so I was angry about that for a longest period of time till I came to understand that really it wasn't so much a curse as it was a warning. You're not going to live your life. Your life is over. And so all these things combined to make it easier for me to be here. Facing my fears helped. Facing my trauma.
Yeah, I'm so glad you went back, and what a blessing for that woman to come out and do that for you.
Oh my gosh, yeah. She's still part of my Mystic Tea salon. She ended up being she was my first real student. Like, she was my student for 2 years. We went through several books on mysticism and helped her understand a deeper, because she's a mystic. But like a lot of mystics, didn't know what to do with her experiences and had no context to think about it. So we spent a couple of years, I met her once a month, and we worked through a couple of different books, and she's still with me. She attends the Mystic Tea Salon.
That's awesome.
It's been, yeah.
Very nice. And I'm intrigued, like, I want to learn more about her, but this is more about you. So after going through this, and I don't know, I feel like perhaps you had like a form of PTSD. I think due to my experiences, I call it paranormal PTSD, because I have issues with sleeping, so on and so forth. Always have, even when I was a kid, and I've gone and seen counselors and such, and my counselor's like, well, why don't you try getting up earlier, and maybe that'll help. No, I went through school for years, the military, everything. Nothing really helps my schedule. It's just a part of me, and I've accepted it. Other people have had issues accepting it, but I'm completely good with it. But for me, like, near-death experience, I didn't, die and come back, so I didn't, see the beauty and feel the love and all of that. But when I did have this, what I call my near-death experience, it was here between Bayfield and Pagosa on a mountain ridge road, and we went up there and saw this, really beautiful creek that we swam in, and on the way back, I'm at a point in my life where I don't really care if I live or die. I'm just kind of willy-nilly flying by the seat of my pants, and lost control on corduroy on the road and brought it back under control, and it felt like something just grabbed my steering wheel and yanked it to the right. And I was able to keep control and not go over the 500-footer, but I did go over the 50-footer. saw where I was going. As soon as I hit, I was able to close my eyes because I know like everything's going to be okay. Had it not been for a tree that caught me, which has happened to my sister and my sister, she's gone through the same sort of thing. I would have died because it was another 1,500-foot drop off. But it was that night that everything to me, you said everything was like two-dimensional and it didn't seem as beautiful. But that night, for me, like the stars were so beautiful, like the trees, like everything around me. I was just so grateful to have that second lease on life. But like I said, I didn't go as far as you did as far as experiencing this. And a lot of people do have issues coming back from that and wanting to just stay there because of the peace and feeling of love and whatnot.
Oh, yeah. And a lot of people get dragged back. Most people don't want to come back. They have to come back.
There's a mission. There's something going on. Something that we're supposed to accomplish, or people that we're supposed to help, or even bring into this world.
Right. Right. Not your time. I've met a few other people who've had the opportunity to make a choice. It's a rare thing, as far as I can tell. Why I got to make a choice, I don't really know. But I understood that when I was dead, I understood how temporary life is, and how deep love is in infinity, and that's what gave me the courage to come back to ask. Because I was like, life, that's so short. I can endure that. That'll be over before I know it. Yeah, it will be, but it's still, going through the number of years that I have to go through in order to get to that point. I'm kind of hoping third time's a charm, by the way.
Right?
We'll see. Yeah.
So what happened with your a second near-death experience? Was it similar to your first, or?
No, it was different. Family genetics. Heart attack. I was at a yoga class. I'd run 5K the day before. I was pretty fit at the time, and I had a heart attack. And I live in a rural place. I've said this a bunch of times. I'm an hour and a half out of a city where there's a catheterization lab, and by the time I left my town, I was already an hour into. I was out of the golden hour. You get a golden hour when you have a massive heart attack. I had 100% blockage in my widowmaker, and they gave me a decoagulant. They gave me a trickle through, but by the time that was all done and I was on my way to the lab, an hour had already passed, and I died on the way in the ambulance. And I left my body and the angel came to collect me. It's time for you to come home. We missed you. It's time for you. Come to us. It's time to you. And I went because I've been waiting. I've been waiting my whole life to go. And I thought, well, wait a minute. I should think about this, because my daughter had just left her husband in not a good situation. He'd gone to war and come back a very different person. Mm-hmm. And they had just had a baby. And who was going to be there for the baby? Who was going to be there for my daughter? Who was going to help her get back on her feet? My son had met me at the ER. It was an urgent care center, they had just changed designation. So he met me at the urgent care center and grabbed my hand and squeezed it and looked me in the eye and said, "I love you." And turns out that the doc had told him to say goodbye to me because I was going to die on the way. Wasn't expected to make it. And when I was out of my body, I thought, well, I know what's going on here. I'm going to heaven. I should think this through. If I get a moment, I'm going to look this over before I go. Is everybody ready for me to leave? So I looked back inside myself. I saw my granddaughter who needs a male role model. I saw my daughter who needs support. I saw my son who wasn't ready for his dad to die. And I looked back at the angel who had already receded and who came rushing toward me again. And I just turned away and went back into my body. And why I could do that, I don't really know. Why, I don't know. But I did. I went back into my body again. And I saw my granddaughter's life without me. And I saw my granddaughter's life with me. And I thought, Oh, I can do that. I can help her. I can die another day. So my second NDE, I didn't go very far up the tunnel, just a bit before I turned around and came back.
Well, I'm so
That's a
glad
brief
you did.
story.
Yeah. And I bet,
Well,
her life is going to be a lot better with you in it.
Well, yeah. She's the golden star of my life. They call me the golden Bampa, but it's she couldn't say grandpa when she was tiny. She could say Bampa. And then when she could say grandpa, she decided to keep it Bampa because she liked it. But they call me the golden Bampa because I'm the star of her life. She's the star of my life. So it's
That's
been pretty
awesome.
great.
Yeah, my dad used to say grandkids are the best. You can spoil them and send them back home. And I don't know. I'm going to be a grandma near, Valentine's Day. I'm still trying to wrap my head around that.
That's my granddaughter's birthday.
Really?
The day before Valentine's Day. Yeah.
That's when my grandson is due.
Cool.
It's pretty interesting. Soikles.
So it's not just what your dad says. It's also that that you can't break them. When you're raising a kid, no parent really knows what they're doing. Everybody's kind of making it up as they go along. The kids don't know that, but now that I'm a grandparent, I'm like, well, I did okay with those kids. I didn't break them too badly. I'm not going to break this kitty. This kid's going to be fine no matter what I do. So it's more fun. I'm less fearful that I'm going to cause harm. I already know I'm going to cause harm. I'm just trying to minimize that. That's all.
Oh, wow. And Mooney in the chat room said his birthday is February 13th. And that was also, I call him my Uncle Daddy because my mom was killed by a drunk driver. Then my dad shortly after abandoned us. So then my aunt and uncle came and got us. And they basically raised me until I was 13. And then a few years ago, I asked my Aunt Sandy to adopt me, so now she's my mama. But that was my Uncle Bill's birthday, too. It's an awesome day. These are amazing people.
Wow, that was in the chat?
Yeah, Moonlight Mooney, a.k.a. Kevin McDougall, said his birthday is also February 13th.
So were you reading that his mom had abandoned him, or was you?
Oh, that was me. My mom was killed by a drunk driver, and then my dad abandoned us. We went for a visit at the grandparents, and then, never went back home. But he did come back when I was 13, and, I understand what he went through, and I went through a lot less than he did, and I took it a lot harder than he did. So, I forgave him a long time ago, and I know, he was just broken. His heart was broken, and so many things for him were broken. But yeah, he was my best friend. He was one of the most amazing people in the world. But yes, both of my parents are on the other side. But I did have an experience about a month or so after my mom passed away. She did come to me in a dream, and I know this was different than a dream. This was basically being in another realm, and I'm in this park. There's no play equipment or anything. There's just this sidewalk, and then there's grass, and then there's trees on each side, and I can see a shadowy figure in the distance, and I'm just walking towards it. And as they get closer, I can see that it's my mom. And, I didn't run. We just kept walking at the same pace, and right where we met up, there was a bench to sit on. And we sat and talked, and she told me she's okay, everything's going to be okay. She named off all my siblings. And your dad, tell them I'm okay and everything's going to be okay. And, I had asked her several questions about, her life on the other side, and, if she's going to be with me and everything. And of course, yeah, she's like, yes, I will be with you always. Kind of omnipresent. But yeah, then she had to go, and it was funny, this room appeared, and I could see that there was windows and a door on it, and I could see people in there, like, sitting and basically waiting for, I think, their turn to go and talk to their loved ones. But it was pretty intriguing. She had to leave. She went back into the room, and then the room disappeared. And I woke up, ran downstairs. Guess what, Dad? I saw Mom, and she said that she loves you, and she's okay, and everything's going to be okay. And I don't know, that was really healing for me.
Yeah. And yes, that is a beautiful experience. Visitations from deceased loved ones are pretty common. I think they're just not spoken of much.
Hmm.
Have you told people that story other than your dad?
Yes. A lot of people, especially, I don't know, for a long time I felt like the angel of death because death was all around me always, it seemed. But I think I'm supposed to be here for other people to help them through it. And so I've shared that experience. And I also saw her one other time. I think I was 16 at the time, and I was working at this place in Ozark, Arkansas called the Model Cafe, and I'm waiting tables, and I see my dad sitting at the table, and he looks so much younger and healthier, and he's just got this big old shit-eating grin on his face, and I was so happy to see him. I'm like, oh, Dad, you came to see me at work. And I think it was a couple of my siblings were there, and I didn't realize it till I walked up to the table, but my mom was there too, and I couldn't say anything. All I could do was cry because it had been 10 years since I saw her last. And
Wow.
and I just knew that smile, she was just letting me know she's still there, and she loves me. And I woke up sobbing, like I had tons of tears coming down my face already once I awoke, and realized it was Mother's Day. So that was pretty interesting too. I believe it's easier for them to come through that way as opposed to trying to manifest and speak to you, because a lot of times when spirits do try to speak to you, unless it's like you were talking about earlier, like telecommunicating, it kind of comes through as a whisper or really nothing at all. It's really hard to hear. So I think in that realm, it's so much easier for them to come through and get their message through.
Yeah. And they have a reason to show up. It's like they're initiating it as opposed to us trying to get their attention. Do you know what I mean? If they come and visit us on their own rather than we go out and seek them.
Mm-hmm. For sure. It's very interesting. I was so grateful for those experiences. But it's interesting how you can tell the difference between that and a dream. I don't know. It's just so real. And it's, to me, just like it happened yesterday as far as the clarity of it. But yeah, it was a very beautiful experience. So after you did have these two different near-death experiences, a lot of people out there, have a hard time in this world and trying to figure out, what is my purpose? Do you know what your purpose is on this earth, or are you still working on it or seeking it out?
I have several purposes, I think. The first one is to be a channel of peace and heaven, to seek the divine itself, that's it. That's really my purpose, is to love. But then there's the more practical things, like help my parents, so that they didn't suffer so much, a loss of a second child, and to be there for my granddaughter for as long as I can be, to help her make her way in the world the best I can. So my purposes are familial, and
Mm-hmm.
also the morning after. So the morning after I died the first time, and we were driving back after treating for hypothermia. The next morning, that night we totaled the car. We hit a semi, and the car was destroyed. And and we pooled our money, and I paid for Tim. I gave Tim my money, and he took a bus back to Bozeman with our skis, because we had our backcountry skis. And because I was a hitchhiker, I hitchhiked back. But that morning, as I stood out there with my sign in Canada, I heard this roaring inside of me that just didn't stop. It didn't stop. It was saying, speak, speak, and calling my name. But I knew that I had some sort of task to be a messenger, but I was pretty upset because I had no words. How could I speak about that thing there was no words for? So part of my purpose is what I'm doing now. What I've done through ministry, my whole life, my whole professional life, has been to try to bring, through words or not through words, just through action, light and love into the world as best as I'm able in the real situations of people's lives. And most people don't understand what ministers do. When I was a minister, I was invited into the most tender and difficult places in people's lives. The most horrendous things that happen to people, that's where ministers go into. So part of my task was to help them negotiate that. Everything from suicides to sudden deaths to lost children to all sorts of tragedies, but to try to be heaven there for them without ever telling them that that's what I was doing. That's what I was trying to do. So part of my purpose is to do what I'm doing right now, trying to bring some hope into the world so that people have a little bit of an easier time of it.
And that's one thing I love about, I do have a group called Four Corners Paranormal Investigations. I often say, I came out of the paranormal closet in 2012. I didn't care what anybody thought or said about me anymore. I just felt like I needed to help this mom or find some answers. So that's when I started the group. But I just find peace in knowing that there is something on the other side. It's not just like you die and it's over, because that's not true. Even scientifically, doctors are seeing when people pass away, there's this little ball of light and it's right below their brainstem, and it stays there for a certain amount of time, and then it leaves the body. I think sometimes it leaves others, but they know there is that energy that remains and then carries on somewhere else. And I don't know, it's just a very nice, peaceful thought, I don't fear it as much, although I must say the older I get, the more afraid of things I am. I'm not as brave as I used to be.
That's wisdom.
Right?
So, that's worldly wisdom for sure. That's for sure what that is. I was trying to think of it. It's getting late for me, so my brain's not working quite as well as it was a few minutes ago. But you were talking about, what were you talking about?
My paranormal group?
Gonna have to move on because I can't. It's way past my bedtime.
No worries.
I'm not as sharp as I was before.
Yeah, and we're in the last 19 minutes. Just know we're almost there. You have the willpower. I know it.
I know what it was. It was, you were talking about coming out of the closet. That's when you didn't care what people said. That's kind of what happened to me in 2015. Well, I knew that. I thought that might happen because the book was coming out, that I wasn't going to be able to be in the closet anymore. My people in my town knew, but people in my state didn't know. But then the book came out, and I came out of the closet altogether. And it was good for me because I wasn't hiding, I wasn't masking anymore, pretending that I was something that I wasn't, which is basically normal. I'm not
tiring.
that way. Yes, it is. It's exhausting.
Mm-hmm. So that's awesome. It was like kind of forced on you, but at the same time, it's a good thing for you. Because then you're not so exhausted from hiding and trying to be something other than what you are. I think it's so much easier to find the answers or go down our path when you do accept it, and you don't really care about that judgment and ridicule. It may be there, but I really don't care anymore. I'm okay with it.
No. And if I lose friends, or I haven't lost any family members. It took my family a long time to believe me, but that's okay. But if I lost some friends over it, well, then they probably really weren't my friends anyway. They probably were just not really people who loved me, because people who love me remained my friends. I remain friends with people who I love no matter what.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, you've talked several times about your sister and how she went missing. I don't know whether she left or was taken. Has she ever come back?
Well, long story, but yeah, she ran away. She wasn't taken. She took off, and she came back a couple times. Once in 1977, my senior year of high school, with a baby, and then she stayed a month, and then she vanished again, and then we didn't see her for, well, about a year later. She got arrested for neglect in Oregon, and by then she had two kids, a brand new baby and this 3-year-old, and she contacted my parents, and my parents paid her bail, and then she fled the country and went to Canada and left the kids behind. And my parents flew out to Oregon to see if they could adopt the two kids. They got one of them. They got the girl, the 3-year-old, who's still with us, and we lost the baby. Couldn't find the baby. So then my sister was gone for till I think it was 1985 when she next showed up in Boston at Thanksgiving. And suddenly she was there, and she walked into the house and she saw her daughter, and she accused my parents of kidnapping her, which was crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was crazy. But it all sort of worked out, and then she vanished again. And it wasn't until probably 2005 when she showed up again, and she was living in South Beach, Miami. My parents had inherited my grandparents' cottage down there, and were frequenting it because it was wintertime. And so they started a relationship with Andrea again. They started seeing her, and they'd met once or twice, and things were progressing for reintegration from estrangement when Andrea died of a heart attack. Same widowmaker heart attack that killed my grandfather, would have killed my dad if they hadn't life flighted him, and would have killed me. And so she died this week. This is the anniversary of what day is today? Today's Sunday. So Thursday this past week was the anniversary of her death in 2007, which left my mom with some healing, because as hard as it was, she knew where Andrea was now and wasn't worried about her every single day.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of closure and healing going on there shortly before she passed. I know it wasn't finished or finite, but they were working towards
but it was helpful.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep, it was.
So did your experience with the afterlife help her to accept her daughter passing, or did that have anything to do with it?
I was always sort of the go-between person in my family between her and everybody else, even as a kid. I don't know whether my near-death experience influenced her. In 1985. I was at divinity school and meditating, but I was still very much a wreck. I was still in depression. My NDE threw me into depression for a long period of time because I was so disoriented and I didn't know what to do with it. I guess in 1985 I was starting to readjust. It takes a long time to adjust from an NDE. They say 10 years anyway. So I was only halfway through that 10 years. But one thing's for sure is that love was the one thing that mattered to me. And I loved my niece, who was then my adopted sister, and I loved my older sister. And so I welcomed her back. I smoothed the way, I guess, as best I could, with all of the turmoil that was still swirling in the background. I've never really thought much about that. I'll have to think about that. That's a good question. Something I should take a look at inside my life.
Definitely. So you've written several books and you've collaborated with other people. So one is Heaven is Beautiful, How Dying Taught Me That Death Was Just the Beginning. 2 Minutes for God, Quick Fixes for the Spirit. Could you give our listeners a little quickie on some quick fixes?
Sure. It's a collection of 365 story collection of 2-minute stories that come from the TV show that I had. I had 2 minutes every morning before the morning weather to tell an inspirational story of hope or faith, but non-denominational. It's a devotional book that's very ecumenical and interfaith. My audience included atheists and Buddhists and everybody who watched the morning news. And so I had to write in such a way that was approachable for everybody, and it became a main bestseller. And each story is 270 words or less, and it's a compelling story from real life, everything from magnetars and dust bunnies to domestic violence and walks in the woods. Nothing was off subject for me as long as it was acceptable for broadcast. But they are all about trying to give you hope in your day. And they do. And I'm working on a third book having to do with the mystical experiences that I have had in my life that aren't near-death experience. That's kind of on hold while I'm working on the movie. And I've been working on the film for a year now with these producers to help develop the shape of the film. They're big-time producers. They're what stars in my brain about what the potential of this could be. But one of them is a near-death experiencer, which is how this whole thing started, why she ended up buying the option on the book. So I've been doing that, and I run a global counseling service for mystics of all different kinds. People who've had mystical experiences that they don't know who else to talk to. I'm that guy. It's my expertise. I talk to near-death experiencers and people who've had unusual spiritual experiences that they want to process. My clientele's global, and I work 3 or 4 days a week on that. And I run Not Church on Sunday mornings, which is no doctrine, no dogma, no Bravo Sierra, because you can't say bullshit on YouTube. And
you can't hear.
Well, I took that hint.
Yeah.
I definitely can. And so it has to do with mysticism. I help deprogram Christianity from a mystical perspective. I am not a Christian, although I am ordained. I'm a near-death experiencer, and I use Christianity. I'm a mystic that speaks with a Christian accent, and so that's what Not Church is on Sunday mornings. And I run some meditation groups during the week on YouTube and on Zoom. So it's a pretty busy life. I spend a lot of time with my granddaughter, picking her up after daycare, camp, bringing her to camp in the morning, and that's going to soon switch to school in another couple of days. So it's a full life.
It sounds like it. That's amazing. And I love the name Not Church. I think I can go to that.
Yeah. It's definitely not church. I when I was in divinity school, I founded our ultimate Frisbee team called the Ultimate Divinity. And so I was one of the co-founders of it. And we're out there one day, my buddy, who's the other co-captain, and with a bunch of new guys, new men and women, were on the field, and someone's trying to break the ice, and the question was, who's your favorite theologian? And so they're all saying who their favorite theologian, and they get to me and they're like, who's your favorite theologian? I say, I don't give a shit about theology. I'm a mystic. And
right?
And I was like, conversation stopper. It's like, what are you talking about?
I hear the crickets again. I hear the crickets.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm a mystic, and I'm open about it now, and I'm not hiding it anymore. And near-death experience is a component of my mystical life, but it's not the totality of it. There's a lot more to it than that. Definitely those are the highest points of my mystical life, but there's more to it than that. And I think that that's true for lots of people. I think a lot of people are in the closet, mystics in the closet, and they're not just people doing paranormal work. They're nurses in hospitals, they're doctors, they're business executives, they're teachers and bus drivers and janitors. It's indiscriminate, but everybody's quiet about it. And I'd really like to see this conversation occur in the public square, that it's okay to be who you are, whoever that is, and have a mystical experience that you can't fully explain, but you know what you know as a result of it. That's what I'm after in this phase of my life.
For sure. And I don't know, for me, it kind of aggravates me when people are like, well, how do you know you weren't sleeping? Okay, how do you know you weren't sleeping when you were driving to work today? Like, this actually happened. These things actually happened within my life, or to me, or however you want to say it. But yeah, there's really no denying it when these things happen. There's no way that you could. And, you know, there's a lot of religious people out there, my Aunt Vicky being one of them. I was super excited to find her again because after my mom passed, I lost touch with a lot of my mom's side of the family. And she was really close friends with my mom, so I felt like she would understand what I'm doing. And I was like, guess what, Aunt Vicky? I'm helping people. You know, I'm doing paranormal investigations and helping people to deal with these certain things going on in their life. And she's like, what makes you think God's going to protect you when you're communing with demons? And I just, like, quit telling her about anything anymore. I'm just like, that to me is so not true, and there's no saying anything to her to turn her around on that. But I feel like this is a gift given to me by God. I've experienced these certain things for a certain reason. And for me to just put it up on a shelf and ignore it and say, this is evil, I'm not going to do it, would be more of a sin to me than actually using this gift. So I'm very grateful for it.
I'm right alongside you with that. Mystical experiences are by nature subjective, and they're not provable. But everybody knows, so I love to use this example, that a person may believe in the afterlife, and maybe they go to church and they're grieving for someone that they love who they just lost, and sometime in the next year that deceased person shows up in a dream or in the waking state and telecommunicates to them love or peace or forgiveness or acceptance or whatever the message is. But from that point on, that living individual now knows that death is not the end. They might not know that about anybody else, but they know that about this particular person, that the one that they love is still alive, just in a different body, in a different place, and in a different way. And that, they can't communicate that. How do they communicate that to somebody else? Aunt Jo came to visit me and told me that she's alive. Who's going to believe them? Nobody. But they know in their hearts, they know the truth. It's so subjective. And that's one of the things that I want to see change, is the acceptance of the subjectivity of mystical experience, because that's the only way it happens. It always happens that way. And you can't prove it. I can't prove my near-death experience. My life shows it. The way that I've lived my life is the only evidence I have. And I've never tried to convince anybody that this happened to me. I tell the story. You believe me, you don't believe me, it doesn't matter to me. I know that it's true. I know how it's impacted the people in my life. I know where I'm from. I know where I'm going. I know who I am. I don't need someone else's approval for a self-understanding that is mystical. But the world does. The world wants evidence. And so maybe what we'll get is that the more people that talk about it, there'll be an accumulation of evidence. So for instance, if you don't have, in a court of law, if you have an accumulation of circumstantial evidence, you might not have the murder weapon, but you can have enough circumstantial evidence to say, the reasonable doubt this happened. If enough of all walks of life, you talk about it openly. Sure, it's a weird place people don't talk about it. But if you talk about your mom, you get a friend, you talk about it in the subway, you talk about it at the shop, little bits at a time, maybe we can make this less weird. People will talk until safe.
And that's what I love about the show, trying to make this a safe place for people to come and hear other people's experience and share their experience. And like, they can speak openly without having fear of judgment or ridicule. But thanks so much, Peter. We are at the end of our time. I'm so grateful that you came on the show and that show got us in touch. Can you tell our listeners where to find you if they haven't, or where to find your books?
Yes, peterpanagore.love. Panagore. Panagore. All my YouTube channel and books are there. They're all at Amazon. But I want to thank you, Tessa, for show for exactly these. You just making a safe place for people like me to voice our experiences to people who had other kinds of experiences. You're forming a much larger web. Thank you for doing this and thanks for being me. Appreciate it. I
agree very much. And I also want to thank all around Orthodox Media's Facebook, Secretor, Periscope, iHeartRadio, and where else beyond the Omniverse you may be listening tonight. I had a wonderful time. And I can't wait to do it again next weekend. We have Mr. Jim Moses going to be talking about going to oblivion and all the things we're going through with Mother Nature right now. And then it's Surprise Sunday, because even I don't know what's happening next Sunday. You guys don't forget, we are all in this together. Together we make the world a little better. And to my friends, we are Paradox Media, because without you, there is no us. And next time, night, love and light. Take care of my yous, and I hope you guys have an awesome, relaxing, wonderful week. The world stretch out. Weeks.